Bunny Wailer was never the face of reggae, yet without him, the story of the music is incomplete. Bunny Wailer was a founding pillar of the Wailers, a spiritual architect who shaped reggae's conscience long before it became global culture. While others carried the spotlight, Bunny carried belief, Rastafari, resistance, and identity, turning music into moral authority. To understand how he became the soul behind one of the most important movements in music history, we need to go back to where it all began. Born Neville O'Reilly Livingston on April 10, 1947 in Kingston, Bunny Wailer didn't grow up dreaming of fame. He grew up absorbing sound, faith, and discipline. His father, Thaddeus Livingston, was a committed Rastafarian, and from him Bunny learned that music could be more than entertainment. It could be belief, resistance, and identity. That worldview would quietly guide every decision he made. Bunny's life changed early when he formed a bond with Bob Marley. Through family ties, Bob's mother, Cedella, had a relationship with Thaddeus. The two boys grew up like brothers. They attended Stepney All-Age School in St. Anne, sharing notebooks, harmonies, and a fascination with American rhythm and blues. Late at night, they tuned their radios toward New Orleans, listening to Curtis Mayfield and Ray Charles, studying emotion and phrasing the way American kids studied baseball cards. For Bunny, U.S. soul music became a distant classroom, shaping how reggae would eventually sound. In the early 1960s, Bunny, Bob, and Peter Tosh came together to form a group that would redefine Jamaican music. They were first called the Teenagers, then the Wailing Rastas, before settling on the Wailers. Under the mentorship of Joe Higgs, they trained relentlessly: harmonies, breathing, songwriting, treating music like a craft, not a gamble. Their breakthrough came in 1963 with Simmer Down, recorded at Studio One for producer Clement Coxone Dodd. The song, a ska-driven warning against street violence, exploded across Jamaica. Suddenly, the Wailers weren't just talented youths, they were national voices. Between 1963 and 1967, they released a steady run of hits like Rasta Road and One Love, reflecting a deepening spiritual awareness and social consciousness that separated them from pop trends. Then, reality intervened. In 1966, Bunny was arrested for marijuana possession and sentenced to 14 months in prison. It wasn't just a legal punishment, it was a cultural collision between Rastafarian practice and Jamaican law. While Bunny served time, Marley and Tosh continued evolving the group's sound. When Bunny returned in 1968, he came back changed, more focused, more rooted. Reuniting with the Wailers, he helped steer the music toward heavier, slower, more meditative roots, reggae, especially through collaborations with the visionary Lee Scratch Perry. By the early 1970s, the Wailers stood on the edge of global recognition. Signing with Island Records, they released Catch a Fire and Burnin' in 1973, albums that carried reggae into international consciousness. Bunny's voice appeared on tracks like Hallelujah Time and Pass It On, but success came with demands he couldn't accept. Endless touring, commercial compromises, and distance from Rastafari principles weighed heavily on him. While Marley embraced the road, Bunny chose the ground beneath his feet. In 1973, he walked away from the Wailers. His solo debut, Blackheart Man, 1976, was not a reinvention. It was a declaration. The album drew directly from his life: incarceration, faith, and the experience of being misunderstood. Songs like Blackheart Man, Fighting Against Conviction, and Rasta Man sounded less like performances and more like testimony. Critics would later call it a roots reggae masterpiece, but Bunny wasn't chasing praise. He was reclaiming his voice. Albums like Protest and Rock and Groove followed, proving he could evolve without abandoning principle. Even when faced with public rejection, most notably the 1991 Sting Festival incident where he was chased off stage, Bunny refused to dilute who he was. In 2016, his Blackheart Man anniversary tour closed the circle, marking 4 decades of artistic independence. By then, Bunny Wailer had become something rarer than a star, a symbol of conviction. And yet, away from albums and stages, another part of his story was quietly unfolding, one that would later raise uncomfortable questions about legacy, neglect, and place. That story begins not in a studio, but at home. Abandoned house. Although Bunny Wailer was best known to live quietly in Washington Gardens, St. Andrews, there is strong indication that he also owned another property in the same parish, one that today tells a far more unsettling story. From the outside, the house feels forgotten. Overgrown weeds wrap around the structure, climbing walls and swallowing pathways, as if nature itself has begun to erase human presence. The building is modest, a single-story home with 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. Nothing extravagant, nothing meant to impress. Step inside, and time feels frozen. Furniture remains scattered but broken. Wooden floors are warped and soft from years of moisture, bending underfoot like they've given up resisting decay. The walls are stained a tired yellow, marked by long-running water damage, while the ceilings show spreading patches of mold. This is not the slow aging of an old home. It's abandonment. Since Bunny Wailer's passing in 2021, the house has remained untouched. No repairs, no restoration, no clear explanation. Some point to possible legal complications, estate disputes, unclear ownership, unresolved inheritance matters. Others see something more symbolic, a reminder that even cultural giants can leave behind unresolved realities. In Jamaica, this is not uncommon. Many legendary artists created music that traveled the world, while the structures tied to their lives were left vulnerable to bureaucracy, silence, or neglect. Whatever the reason, the silence surrounding this abandoned house forces a deeper look at what remains after the music fades. And that silence leads naturally to another uncomfortable but necessary question. How did Bunny Wailer's life's work translate into financial reality, ownership, and control? That story unfolds next, in the numbers behind the legacy. Income and net worth. At the time of his death in 2021, Bunny Wailer was estimated to have a net worth of around $1.5 million, a figure that reflects devotion to art rather than commercial expansion. Unlike many modern musicians, Bunny built his livelihood almost entirely from music. There is no credible evidence of major business ventures, endorsement deals, or side empires tied to his name. The foundation of his income came from music royalties and publishing rights. As a composer and co-composer of early Wailers material, albums such as Catch a Fire and Burnin', and as the sole creative force behind a long solo career beginning with Blackheart Man in 1976, Bunny secured ongoing royalties from streaming, physical sales, licensing, and archival reissues. These earnings continue posthumously through his estate, tied to a catalog that remains culturally relevant. Album sales and recording contracts added another layer. Releases on labels including Solomonic and Shanachi generated steady, if not spectacular, returns over decades. Reissues and compilations of historic Wailers recordings also contributed, particularly as reggae reached new audiences through digital platforms and curated releases. Recognition amplified that value. Bunny Wailer won 3 Grammy Awards for Best Reggae Album in 1991, 1995, and 1997, honors that boosted visibility, sales, and licensing opportunities. Yet even with accolades, his financial profile stayed modest by American industry standards. He chose independence, integrity, and spiritual alignment over scale. And when the music paid him back, he didn't keep the focus on accumulation. The next chapter shows how that income and influence were redirected outward, into philanthropy, community, and Rastafari giving. Philanthropy. After his passing in 2021, multiple reports confirmed that Bunny Wailer left a significant portion of his estate to the Rastafari community. This was not symbolic generosity. His contributions supported Rastafari education, Pan-African initiatives, repatriation ideals, and the Nyabinghi order, one of the spiritual foundations of Rastafari life. For Bunny, philanthropy was inseparable from faith. His music preached liberation and dignity. His resources helped sustain the institutions that carried those values forward. Beyond Rastafari-centered giving, Bunny also aligned himself with broader humanitarian organizations connected to Jamaica's development. He supported American Friends of Jamaica, AFJ, a U.S.-based nonprofit that channels funding into education, healthcare, economic development, and disaster relief across the island. AFJ operates as a bridge between diaspora support and on-the-ground impact, a model that matched Bunny's belief in practical action over symbolism. He was also associated with Helping Hands Jamaica Foundation, an organization dedicated to building and restoring schools to improve educational access for thousands of Jamaican children. Education, in Bunny's view, was cultural preservation. Without it, music and history risked becoming folklore instead of living identity. Another cause close to his values was mustard seed communities, which provides care for children with disabilities, children living with HIV/AIDS, and those from severely disadvantaged backgrounds. Through residential homes and community programs, the organization addressed needs that extended beyond politics or religion, needs Bunny believed demanded human responsibility. And while his public generosity shaped institutions and communities, there was still a quieter, more guarded side of Bunny Wailer's life, one defined by love, loss, and the personal cost of devotion. Personal life. At the center of Bunny Wailer's private world was one enduring presence, his lifelong partner Jean Watt, known to many as Sister Jean. Their story began in the streets of Trenchtown, Kingston, where they met as teenagers long before fame arrived. Though they never formalized their union through marriage, a choice shaped by Bunny's Rastafarian beliefs, their bond proved unwavering. Jean was not simply a companion. She was part of the work. She designed many of Bunny's signature stage garments and stood by him through pivotal moments, including his imprisonment in the late 1960s for marijuana possession. Bunny's personal life, however, was complex. He fathered 13 children with different women, yet Jean remained his emotional anchor. Their relationship endured through decades of separation, pressure, and public attention, grounded more in devotion than convention. That devotion was tested in the most painful way in 2020. Jean, who had been living with dementia, disappeared from their home in Washington Gardens, St. Andrew, on May 23rd. Despite widespread searches, private investigations, and a $1 million Jamaican reward, she was never found. The loss cast a long shadow over Bunny's final year, a quiet tragedy that unfolded away from cameras and stages. Health challenges followed. In September 2018, at the age of 71, Bunny suffered a mild stroke shortly after returning to Kingston from his farm. The stroke affected his speech but not his spirit. He remained mobile and determined, focusing on recovery with characteristic discipline. His manager, Maxine Stowe, spoke publicly about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and heal, as a guiding principle in his rehabilitation. However, on March 2, 2021, Bunny Wailer passed away at the age of 73 in Kingston, Jamaica, at a hospital in St. Andrews Parish. News of his death traveled quickly. Jamaican leaders, including the Prime Minister and Minister of Culture, mourned him as a national treasure. Fellow artists and fans described him as a mystic, a pioneer, and a conscience for reggae music. Major international outlets, NPR, Rolling Stone, The Guardian, the BBC, and the New York Times, published tributes that emphasized his quiet authority, his 3 Grammy Awards, and national honors such as the Order of Merit and the Order of Jamaica. More than accolades, they highlighted his role as a spiritual ambassador, an artist whose albums blended meditation, resistance, and reverence. His funeral later in 2021 reflected that legacy. Dignified, rooted, and resolute. Bunny Wailer left behind music that refuses to age and principles that resist compromise. His life reminds us that some legends don't chase history, they guard it. Thank you for staying with us and honoring these stories that shape cultural history. If this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps these legacies alive. Rest in peace, Ja Bunny.